Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, if you're joining us from the Americas, or good afternoon if you're joining us from Europe, from the Middle East, the North of Africa region, or anywhere else. Yesterday, we had people even from Australia, from Chile, from South Africa. We had people from everywhere. So feel free to also share with us where you're joining us from, if you're still back. William, welcome back. I'm glad that you were back today, and I hope you have a lot of questions like yesterday. With me today, so let me go back. So we're covering blockchain, SolarCoin. Yesterday was the first part of this three-part series in which we're going to go in depth into this new technology. And we're exploring how this blockchain that we've heard so much about actually relates to energy, what we can do with it. And in particular, this one use that it would be SolarCoin, and how it works, where's the value coming from, etc. With us today, we have two super experts, one of which just lost his camera because he's playing around. But let's start. Paul, can you introduce yourself, please, and tell us where you're joining from? We cannot hear you at the moment. You need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Advanced technology, mute. No, I'm delighted to come back. Yesterday, I thought yesterday's webinar with Nick was great. And so to be able to talk a little bit today about currency and how it relates to SolarCoin is, I think, will be some fun. I have a presentation that I'll run through. My background is primarily I'm an adjunct professor at both Columbia University here in New York City and Fordham University. I traditionally teach investing courses and have for years. In the last year or so, I've taken these skills and taken it to the crypto world. And very much trying to bring some economic balance and some economic discussion to tokens, currencies, and blockchain. So I've been working with Nick. I'm an advisor to the SolarCoin Foundation. I've been the economic advisor for about a year. And then I also, with Nick, work in a group called Harbor Peak, where we do advisory work for companies and governments on these topics. And then I write and teach and some other things. So I'm excited to share some of our views today with everybody. And I know we'll have only a couple of questions at the end because this is an easy topic for everybody to get their head around.
There's no way that's going to happen, and you know it, Paul. We're really lucky to have you here with us today. And Nick, do you want to also introduce yourself just in case we have someone new? Nick isn't going to talk much. He does love talking, but he's promised he's just going to let Paul talk today.
Right. Go on. I'm the co-founder of SolarCoin. Based around the New York City area, and SolarCoin was set up about 3 or 4 years ago. An expert in blockchain finance and technology, and we'll leave it at that.
Excellent. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to ask Araceli to take this presentation off, and Paul, you can share yours. And while Paul is sharing his presentation and getting ready, so a few things, guys, let us know where you're joining from. These two guys are actually connecting from New York, or an hour outside of New York. I am from Madrid, but there are people here from everywhere. Paul, you're supposed to just go again and just share the document, not the screen.
Yep. We'll get this going, and there we go.
Okay, so just one more thing, guys. Questions and answers box is at the bottom there. Send them through. We'll try to get to as many as possible. Thank you very much. Go, Paul.
Excellent, thank you. All right, I will run through it's about 20 slides. I will walk through it, I think, very carefully. I know currency can get complicated, and there are some concepts here that I think will be new. Some of that will come out in the Q&A. I'm hoping that we can set a foundation for the discussion, and I'm sure a lot of you will want to follow up, which I'd be delighted to. Really important question is why currency? Why does it exist? How does it exist? Why did it get invented? And I want to really try to answer that question so we can get this to work. Oh, sorry, in the wrong window, I think. All right. Currency, the interesting thing is that currency has emerged in every community, civilization, and history. If you go back 5,000 years, any culture you look at, they invented currency. If we put people into prison camps or prisons, not necessarily a fun thought, but you'll see as currency emerges there. If you had a community that got stranded on an island or got isolated from the rest of the world, it would develop a currency. Every culture develops a currency. Currency appears to be a fundamental emergent behavior in all cultures, all civilizations, and it has for literally the history of man. It's important to understand that it's always a localized phenomenon, and it changes from culture to culture, civilization to civilizations based on the economic needs of that culture, and it almost always emerges as the best available, what we'll call intermediate good. I'll explain that in a minute. If you have to choose between trading fish or trading gold, gold wins. If you have to trade fish or barley, barley tends to win. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the historical currencies we've seen. But it's important to take away that all communities develop a currency. It appears to be 100% an invention 100% of the time, and it's always localized. Those are the two most important things you should take away. Next, it really emerges from the following, you call it problem, but it's really an economic fact, which is specialization increases productivity. So if I'm really good at raising chickens, I want to spend as much time as I can raising chickens. I'm going to create more wealth for me and my family if I specialize. If I'm better at fishing, I should fish. If I'm better at weaving, I should potentially make clothing. Now, in our modern day society, we've gotten very specialized, but very few people do more than sort of a single activity, a single job. So specialization is something that naturally happens again in every culture. And I think this is where it starts. Where if I raise one chicken, I should probably raise a lot of chicken. The problem with that is I have to exchange, because I can't just live on chicken. So in this example, simple examples, I have to get a new pair of boots. And the gentleman in the green suit has decided that he's really good at making boots. So he's going to specialize in boots, and he potentially wants chickens. So if he wants chickens and I want boots, both at the same time, we potentially can trade. The challenge becomes simply that if he doesn't want chickens at that moment, but he wants apples, or he needs cloth, or he needs something for something else, I can't trade because I have chickens. I don't have what he needs, and he has what I want. And this is what we call the coincidence of wants. So what it has emerged is an intermediate good that we trade. So I trade chickens for that intermediate good. The gentleman in the green suit, he trades his boots for that intermediate good, and then we can exchange the intermediate good. He doesn't have to get chickens, and I don't have to get boots. And what's happened is that this intermediate good, which we call currency, has emerged in every culture the moment they start to specialize. So the next thing you should think about is first thing is currency always emerges. It's always localized because we're doing local trade, and it comes out of this specialization. The moment I start raising chickens and I don't make my own boots, I need to trade. The moment I need to trade, I need an intermediate good to resolve that, and that's currency. So why do we have currency? We have to have currency. We need currency. We can't do trade without currency. And what we've seen is that it emerges literally in every culture because of that need. All right, so it's what you think about is it solves the exchange problem. And so the moment we start exchanging, we have to solve that problem, and that's what currency does. All right, so exchange in small groups is easy. I run into Hans in the green suit all the time. He knows who I am, I know who he is. And so if we don't have the right currency at the moment, we just can trade and we remember, and over time we kind of balance the account. That gets a little trickier as the group gets larger. If I want apples or fish, or I need some sort of goods, tools to help in the field, or maybe I need to protect myself. Now all of a sudden I'm doing a lot more exchanges, a lot more trading, and it's much harder to keep track. I might only buy boots once a year. Maybe I do buy apples every week. That one's easier, but these things become more complicated quickly. And you can see now how the currency becomes a very important exchange tool between all of these people. I don't have to remember the last time I bought boots. I don't have to remember the price. I don't have to remember how many chickens it's equivalent. I just trade the currency, the local currency. So as the group gets a little bit bigger, currency its role becomes more important because the number of exchanges become more frequent, and the trying to keep track of all of the information becomes almost impossible. And so the currency becomes this memory. It holds the prices in place, and it reminds me of, oh, I need this many currency units to buy a sword, or this many currency units to buy some apples. I don't have to remember that anymore. That's all taken care of for me. Well, you can imagine as the group get more and more complicated, the problem gets more complicated, and now all of a sudden currency becomes a critical tool to allow this community to exist. If I exchange with somebody every week, we can kind of remember. If I exchange with somebody every couple of weeks, I might remember. But the moment I exchange with somebody infrequently, or maybe for the first time ever with a stranger, I no longer can rely on repetition, memory, reciprocity, or anything else. I need to have a clean exchange. The only way to have a clean exchange is to have an intermediate good that I change my chickens into that good, and then I use that good to go change it for fish or apples or tools or swords or cloth or anything that we do. And that intermediate good is currency. So currency plays this incredibly important role in that it is effectively what the lubricant that allows all this to happen. We couldn't have a modern society without currency, and every society invents currency. So it seems to be a critical component of the economics of any community. And as we get back and we touch this to SolarCoin at the end, you'll see that we're trying to build a SolarCoin community. And we're going to use the token as a way of binding everybody together. Just a quick recap of that. Small groups, we can use reciprocity. As the groups get bigger, about 150, initially we need a currency. Historically, that's a commodity-based currency. I'll show you examples in a minute. As we get to thousands to millions, we generally emerge to a commodity currency based on precious metals. And then in the more modern history, as we got into nation states, it's a government issued currency, which is generally just based on collective trust. And one of the sets of questions that came up yesterday is, how is it possible to have a currency that's only based on collective trust? I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but that is the great phenomenon that seems to confuse most people about currency. All right, so currency is the grease that makes the economy work. Without currency, it wouldn't work. You need it, and it's always been invented for that very reason. This is what I want to take away, is currency emerges as the intermediate good. That's the key phrase that's used in exchange or trade, and it's essentially an information or value placeholder. I know that's a lot of words, but the way we do it is it's that memory, it's the way of transmitting the information. Rather than say, I need 3 hours of work to get one pair of boots, it says that for 3 hours of work, I get paid $150. And oh, by the way, the price of boots is $150. So the currency keeps track of those exchanges. And I think that's very important. And it's a very valuable tool that way. All right, currency can be literally anything, and over time it's been a lot of things. At war or prison camps, it's often a pack of cigarettes, which has got some interesting characteristics, but it's somewhat limited. It's divisible. You often have 20 cigarettes to a pack, so I can break it down. In a casino, at the door, you convert money, regular money, to these chips. You can't spend regular money at the table. And oh, by the way, those chips are only good in that casino. In prisons, particularly in the US over the last 20 years, these packets of mackerel fish have become a form of currency. So we see it, it's literally in every community, they've invented currency. Historically, it has been cowrie shells, which is sub-Saharan Africa. In Northern Africa, it was salt, which makes sense. Those of you that live there or know about it, obviously there was a point where if you didn't have access to salt, you could die. In Mesopotamia, it was barley. Barley accounted for 60% of the calories of that world, of that culture. Barley has got some great characteristics. It's fairly stable over time. It breaks down into smaller units. In North America, before we had kind of modern day currency, beaver pelts were important because it gets cold, almost half of the year, at least northern part of North America. So we've seen currency of all kinds of forms. And at about 2500 BC, gold and silver, these precious metals, were introduced. As you can imagine, they have, we'll talk about this momentarily, but they have better characteristics than pelts or salt or barley. They're more durable. They hold up, they're easier to carry, there's no kind of concern. They have a generally universal acceptance. Gold's kind of a cool commodity, which I'll talk about momentarily. But the moment we introduced these base metals, this currency took over time because it was superior to the items we had before. And so as you think about the evolution, we started with just trade, and I remembered because I was trading with my cousin, my friend, my next door neighbor. We then needed an intermediate good that generally was something that had some localized value or some utility. These precious metals were introduced, and they were far superior forms of currency, and so they won out mostly because of their physical attributes. There's a few other attributes, but that was the thing. And then they dominated the currency world for an awfully long time, which I'll talk about. Gold's kind of cool. The same analysis applies to silver, but the reason we settled on gold is because we need something that's an element. We don't want a compound. We want something that's a base unit. The periodic table, this is the elements that God gave us on our planet. And kind of a fun experiment is that you go through it and you say, well, we want a currency. We want it to be an element. We want it to have some other characteristics. So on the left, we list kind of 5 things that we could think about. It can't be a gas. Obviously, that would be a terrible currency. Can't be radioactive. No one would trade with you. They like your money, but then they die. It can't be too common because we know in currency, there has to be some level of scarcity or it will have no value. On the other hand, it can't be too rare because there's not enough of it to work as that lubricant in the economy. And then it has to be easy to work with because coins are better than lumps. And so we end up with 4 elements, palladium, platinum, silver, and gold. And what's really important to understand is since currency, these base metals emerged almost 5,000 years ago, call it 4,000 years ago, you needed something that was easy to work with. And gold and silver were such that we had the technology to melt them. We didn't have the technology to melt platinum or palladium, although palladium wasn't even discovered until the 1800s, so it wasn't really a candidate. But platinum was one where you need 1860 level blast furnace technology to melt it. So gold and silver won because they fit perfectly for what we needed. They fit all the characteristics that we wanted. Gold, I think, beat out for 2 reasons. One, it's the only element that has that shiny yellowy color, whereas silver is similar to a lot of different elements in terms of its color, and there's less gold than there is silver. So gold is a lovely product. It's a great element. It's shiny. We like it. We're all attracted to it. And it's a little bit more scarce than silver, so it emerged. And I think it's important to just talk about gold for one more sentence. Gold emerged as an element that we liked in jewelry. Rich people had it. It started to emerge as an international trade currency, and then ultimately it became a common currency. And that was 4,500 years ago. So gold as a currency is almost 5,000 years. So the reason that gold is so important to our culture is because our culture co-evolved with gold, which I think is a really important point that people have to understand, is that the reason we're so fixated with gold is because we co-evolved with gold. But gold has almost no utility, functional utility. It's great in jewelry. It's great as an ornament. It has a little bit of industrial applications, but very small. Easily replaced by other elements, other metals, but it has this very important cultural aspect, which is why gold takes on sort of this this position in our culture. We give out gold stars, we give out gold medals. In the US, the old phrase, we gave out a gold watch when somebody had been there, and you all have as many examples. So that's why gold is sort of important. But then we got banknotes. And banknotes are better than gold. So gold beat out fish and barley and furs and salt, whereas banknotes to some degree beat out gold because it's easier to carry banknotes than it is to carry gold. And it's easier to make lots of banknotes. And so initially banknotes were representational money. A banknote represented a receipt for gold. So I had a certain amount of gold or silver. I then had banknotes that represented that gold or silver. We knew what gold and silver was. The banknotes were a better technology. They had better features than gold. I'd rather carry around banknotes. But I always knew that if I ever needed gold, I could take the banknotes to the bank, the issuing bank, and they would trade gold for banknotes. And all of that lasted for about 200 years or so. And then in the late kind of post-World War II, officially 1971 in the US, we went off the gold standard. And for people that are really fixated with hard money and gold money, that was a dark day in the history of currency. But if you believe that currency is just a placeholder that allows exchange, that event was inevitable. That event was not that big a deal. And I would argue that a lot of hand-wringing over the last 50, 60 years over that has been wasted. Banknotes have some great characterization, features, and particularly as you go to electronics, then we abstract it even more. All right, so economists like to believe that currency plays three roles in an economy. I'm not going to go into great detail. Unit of account, which is the measure of historical transactions and the listing of current prices. It's this medium of exchange, which we've talked a lot about. And then in theory, it's a store of value. And I will just show you that most of the economists, I think, are wrong. Medium of exchange is just when transactions happen in the present, as we've been talking about. The store of value is nothing more than an exchange in the future, and therefore very much a function of how well that currency does over time. If the currency is going to lose value, then anything denominated in that, the currency itself will be less valuable in the future. And then unit of exchange is just historical, unit of account is nothing more than historical exchanges. So currency is always a medium of exchange. It's nothing more, it's nothing less. And it just depends on your time horizon, which we capture in this little graphic, which is anything in the past is a unit of account. Anything in the future is a future exchange. We'll call that store value. And anything in the moment is really medium of exchange. They're all really the same thing. So currency is an information protocol, as we kind of been hinting at. This is hard for a lot of people to catch this step. Its only role is to be that intermediate good in exchange. It's a great memory. It holds the information. I don't have to remember that 3 hours equals a boot, 15 minutes equals a bag of apples. The currency does all of that for me. So it's this information protocol. Most people, when they get up in the morning, have breakfast, maybe they grab a cup of coffee on the way to work, maybe they grab a pastry or a donut, they then go to lunch. At night, maybe they go out to the pub, maybe they go home, pay rent, everything. At no point does anyone spend any time worried about the currency in most cultures and most economies. Not so in some countries. So currency is something that we ignore, we don't think about until it becomes a problem. And the reason is because we've all accepted that I'm going to, in the US, use dollars. In Europe, I'm going to use the euro. In the UK, I'm going to use sterling. And then each culture has their own. And we use that as an exchange because we're comfortable that we'll be able to use it as an exchange. So it's this belief system that this currency is going to continue. And for a lot of people, they get upset at that because how could it just be a belief system? Well, it's a belief system in that it's just an information protocol. It's a way of transmitting that information. It's a way of conducting exchanges. The best way to think about this is a network. At the right, we have a picture of a sphere network, just so you can see the dimensions. The dots are nodes or the economic agents. That's the individuals, companies, governments, anybody who deals with exchange in that network. The lines are potential exchange points where you could buy a product, you could exchange with somebody. And the way you exchange, that protocol for the line is the currency. Now, not all the links are active. You may only buy a house once a life. You may only buy a car every 5 or 6 years, but you buy your coffee maybe every day. So some links are very active, some links are infrequent, and some links not at all. On your way to work, maybe there's 4 places you could buy coffee, so that link exists, but there's 1 place you do buy coffee. So 1 of the 4 is active, but the other 3 are potential. So the value of a currency starts to become the value of the size of the network, which we'll talk about on the next slide. But you can see right away as you get this abstraction that the currency is the way the agents talk to each other in exchange. So in the US, we talk in dollars. In Europe, you talk in euros. If you travel from the US to Europe, you have to convert to their language, which is euros. You can't spend dollars. It's very hard to spend dollars in Europe. You can, but it's very hard. It's very easy to spend euros. And it's very hard to spend euros in the US, whereas it's very easy to spend dollars. So that's that local communication protocol. It's the local language of exchange. We talk in dollars in the US, we talk in euros in Europe. And I think that starts to help you think about this because you've all had that experience. Economies are nothing more than exchange networks, and the currency is the exchange protocol. The protocol is clearly a function of the number of nodes that accept it. And that value of that protocol, give or take, is something in the neighborhood of n-1, n being the number of agents in the network squared. So you can see as the number of n's go up, the value of the protocol goes up. And as we talk about cryptocurrencies, we talk about tokens, you really want to think about the n, how big is that exchange network? Who's going to take the currency in terms of exchange? Most networks exhibit a winner take all, take most tendencies. We tend to have a single token or currency in an economy. In the US, it's dollars. In Europe, it's euros. You do have some trade going on in other currencies, but very small amounts. So as you think community, think how big the community is, think how active the community is, and then the exchange protocol that will win is generally the best protocol for that application, as we saw with currency. So currency is a collective belief system serving as an exchange protocol. I know that that's a big leap. I think it's really important for people to think through. And as long as the collective belief holds, the currency will hold its value. If the belief system is expanding, the network's expanding, generally the exchange protocol, the value of that will go up, but not always. It may just stay stable as the network goes. And as the collective belief fails, which is happening in some of the countries on the planet, what you see is the value of the exchange protocol goes away. And currencies historically have had a median life of about 27 years, so they don't last very long. The euro is 20 years old. The US dollar is a couple hundred years old. Sterling's the oldest active currency on the planet at the moment. But it's only a couple hundred years old. So you know, gold's 5,000 years. The modern day currencies are much younger. There are a lot of currencies out there that are fairly young and haven't existed. Certainly an exchange traded RMB is only 20 years old. So these currencies generally are short-lived. They serve their purpose, and something often comes along with is better. The euro, for those of you in Europe, you know more about this than I do. The idea was to create a collective single currency for that economic area, with mixed results, obviously goods and bads. All right, so just the value of currency, this becomes important. It only becomes tangible when you go to exchange. As long as the belief system is there, its value holds. If the belief system gets challenged, then its value can be challenged. And so the value of currency is realized when one person puts trust in the currency at the moment of exchange. You're willing to exchange your hard work for that local currency. You're willing to exchange your apples for that currency. That's that belief system. And this is the part that's really hard and I think tricky for a lot of people. And I see this in a lot of debates. You know, what's the value of a currency? We see this as we talk about cryptocurrencies. And a lot of people say, well, it's impossible to determine the value of a currency until you have that moment of exchange. And a lot of people don't like that. It should be able to have a value that is, sometimes referred to as an intrinsic value or a fundamental value. And the fact is, currency does not have that value. And because it doesn't have that value, that is very unsettling for a lot of people. But it's just a way of talking economic language. It's a communications protocol. And people, this final one is meant to be a little controversial, but it's that point of exchange when something that's intrinsically worthless, a piece of paper, becomes a reality. And that's critical that way. All right, there's my contact information. I am done with the formal part. Why don't we stop share, see if this works.
Okay. Thank you very much, Paul. I have hundreds of questions. Some of them are actually been sent by other people, but I suppose a lot of the people that are joining us today may not really understand how currency may break down in some countries. I am familiar myself because I follow the story, in Venezuela, for example, but not everybody might understand. So could you just talk a little bit about what happens when there is a failure of trust?
Yeah, I think the failure of trust is often associated with over issuance of a currency. And we've seen this in history where it is often in a smaller country, although it can happen in a bigger country. It happened in Germany in between the wars, where they had this runaway inflation where you had a very constrained economy. They issued enormous amounts of banknotes, Reichsmarks, and you got this inflation because people stopped trusting the currency to hold value and hold value even over a couple hours. Initially it wouldn't hold value over a year, and then it wouldn't hold value over a couple of months, and then it wouldn't hold value even for a couple of weeks, and then got to the point where it wouldn't even hold value over a couple of hours. And so the currency failed because they issued way too much of it and they couldn't keep in front of it. They generally issue that currency because of government spending. The way the governments can spend money is they print money. And the moment there's too much of it around, you can lose that faith. We're seeing that obviously Venezuela, there's an economic crisis, which is incredibly unfortunate to have a country on the planet go through that. And the government is trying to solve that problem, and we're trying to solve that problem by overprinting money to pay for government expenditures. And they got out of balance. People lost faith. And because currency is really based on faith, the moment it loses faith, it's all over. It's almost impossible to restore faith. So what they're doing is lots of ways to restore faith. So they want to issue a currency that's backed by oil. So that becomes that representational paper money, where now it's really, you can't trade oil. It's hard to walk into a store and buy groceries with a cup of oil. So they want to do is issue currency that's backed by oil that in theory would limit how much the government can issue. And if I ever wanted to, if I had a lot of that money, I could in fact take delivery in oil and then maybe sell that oil on the international market. So what they're trying to do is restore faith in a currency by going back to what we did many years ago, which was to link it to a physical item, which is often referred to as representational money because it represents a real commodity. That commodity has utility, that commodity has trading value, and so that's what they're trying to link it to. Gold was that, we use gold for that mostly in history, but they don't have a lot of gold, so they're going to use something they do have, which is oil.
Excellent. Just if anyone is interested in hearing a really interesting story about how money sort of loses and gains value, Planet Money has a great episode about Brazil and how they restore the value of the currency. It's like a 15-minute listen and it's really interesting. Okay, so I'm starting with the questions now. Nick is taking care of some of them, but here we go. Please elaborate on the protocol aspect of the currency.
I'm sorry, the practical aspects of the currency?
Protocol. That's my accent.
Protocol. I'm sorry, protocol.
No, don't worry.
Yeah, no worries. Protocol. So think of protocol as nothing more than an accepted language. So currency has an easy protocol. I walk into a store and the shirt's $150 and the pants is $100 and the shoes have a certain price. So the protocol is that currency. It's just a way of thinking about storing or reflecting that value. But a protocol is nothing more than an accepted language. So English is a protocol and Spanish is a protocol, and that's a way of communicating. And if you go to a part of the world where they only speak Spanish, it's going to be very difficult to communicate with them not speaking Spanish. They just literally don't understand. So protocol is a communication language. We use it more in computers than we do anywhere else because we have a lot of protocols. But the way the internet works is a set of protocols. Your browser has will interpret certain protocols. So protocol is a way of communicating. So language is a protocol. Fax machines were protocols. You had to have a certain language for a fax machine to work. In currency, it's a protocol. It's a fairly simple protocol because what we're doing is exchanging information, and that information is, we generally think of it as price, but it's relative value. So if I walk into a store that sells clothing and the shoes are $300 and the shirt's $150, it's essentially the shoes are 2 shirts. And let's say the pants are $100. Well, then a shirt is 1.5 pants. That's a very complicated way to communicate. So what we do is we convert everything into a simple unit. We call that unit currency. And in each culture, we label that with a name. So think of it as a protocol, as a way of exchanging relative value information.
Thank you very much. And the energy producer gets rewarded a SolarCoin. But what do the SolarCoin Foundation get rewarded for giving it? So in other words, how does it work?
I think Nick's here. Maybe I'll let Nick answer that question.
Sure. I just typed in the answer. So effectively, 2 things occur. One, the founders and co-founders of SolarCoin Foundation have retained the rights to 0.51% of the SolarCoins. Which they have restricted access to never being greater than 5% of the circulating monetary base. And on a secondary perspective, large solar energy facilities are assessed a 10% network development fee, which goes for building out software and maintaining the network. So it's all in SolarCoin. There's no other thing.
You're not going to end up retiring in the Caribbean, Nick? Are you sure?
It will take time, but that could happen.
Excellent. Okay, there's a question here that I think this one is more for you, Paul. Can you clarify the discussion around currency versus security versus commodity and explain where SolarCoin sits?
I will try to, and then we'll go from there. All right, first is that currency is always a localized phenomenon. It's historically been a commodity of some type because we understood it, it had some value, and we cared about it. Gold came along and was kind of shiny and fun, so we replaced that. And then the modern version of currency has really been banknotes, and now you could argue that it's really the electronics around banknotes. So it's currency is even becoming even more abstract as we go into this digital world. So it's important to understand where it came from. That's why we talk about it this way. Commodities in and of themselves generally have value because there's some utility value to the commodity, whether it's grain, that's a form of calories for eating. If it's oil, that's a form of industrial input for either energy or for some sort of plastics. So those are real commodities that we end up consuming in some form as humans. Gold and silver are commodities as well, but they tend to have this kind of currency value associated with them. So that's kind of the commodity currency part of it. Now, what SolarCoin is it's really cool, and Nick and I have spent a lot of time talking about this, is there is this community of solar producers, which I think most people will agree is a good thing for the planet. It's a renewable energy source. It's fairly democratic, which is kind of fun. It's spread all over the planet fairly uniformly. Some places have less cloud cover than others, but everybody gets access to the sun. And what Nick really did when he launched SolarCoin is, can we create a community around that? Can we create an incentive system? And then the hope is, and he and I think really both of us believe, that we'll end up with this community around SolarCoin that will be a community of like-minded people that are trying to promote renewable energy, particularly solar. And this will be a way for them to support it. And we think a network will emerge outside of that, and people that want to support solar energy will accept SolarCoin in terms of exchange. And you could see all kinds of communities doing fun things, like you could ride hybrid buses with SolarCoin because that promotes solar energy in a transportation thing. And so it's a lot of fun to think about how this network will come along. But what it's really trying to do is encourage solar production, which I think everybody would agree is probably a good thing for the planet.
Thank you very much. Okay, here, talking about trust. Why could not a crisis of trust happen to the solar coin? Let's say that any shock to the trust of other cryptocurrencies or to the blockchain could affect the value or the exchange capacity of the solar coin. Could this happen? How could it happen?
Yeah, I think so. And again, I'll let Nick jump in, but I do think the trust is important. It's going to be really everybody in the community is going to have a little bit of a responsibility that we keep the community as clean as possible. We won't be able to control what's going on with other cryptos and other blockchains, but it's quite possible that what we'll see is we can see a divergence where this community really will be separate from those communities. And I think if we're all good governance, we can keep the faith up. But some of this is going to be on the foundation. Some of it's going to be on the participants. I assume Nick, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess I'll go first up to the first principles is, people choose the currency they want. And so the earlier or is best for them. And so the earlier examples Paul articulated was people use salt at one point, beaver pelts, etc. Then they moved to gold because it was more effective as a means or protocol. And then they moved to this paper-based format. So people choose the protocol that works for them. And to the degree that someone wants to diversify their portfolio of holdings of currency, they can hold a little dollar, a little bit of euros, a little local currency, or a little solar coin. Our job for the SolarCoin Foundation is to maintain the integrity of issuance, which means that the premise behind the economy and the coin is 1 megawatt hour generated, 1 solar coin in circulation. And so every time a solar coin goes into circulation, there's a little text message that explains why that happens. But that, if you choose to participate, and it's free choice, obviously, in the solar coin economy, either accepting them or spending them, is our job. The other thing that's obviously the revolution in cryptocurrencies around trust is the visibility into the circulating base, right? So, before crypto, if I wanted to create my own currency, I print up pieces of paper, I'd try and circulate them around. But in theory, anyone could do anything with the printing press, and people using it wouldn't be able to see how much other currency was out there in circulation. So the thing about Bitcoin is that the circulation is a known algorithmic function, which puts the trust into it. And that's why Bitcoin and some of the cryptos have grown so significantly, because the risk to a currency, the primary risk, is overissuance or hyperinflation. The median life of a currency is 27 years. I just put a link into that information. And so it's hyperinflation that kills the currency. So a lot of the trust comes from the restriction or the knowledge of what the issuance mechanism is in the circulating base.
Thank you very much. We'll do a couple of questions more and then we'll move on, because tomorrow we have another day, and as we know, we're going to be good. But it's been said that cryptocurrencies like SolarCoin need more regulation to become generally accepted. But then it will lose its independence and it will become manipulated like any other currency. So it's this centralization versus decentralization. Good luck with that one, Paul.
Well, I do think it's very important to separate what we'll call currencies in this new world from tokens in this new world. It's clear that SolarCoin is, it really, you want to think of it as a token. It will have currency-like functions in the SolarCoin community, whereas Bitcoin is really trying to be a more generic digital form of currency. So if there's going to be regulation, I would be very surprised if anyone wants to regulate some of these tokens. I think that's probably a long ways away. As the pure digital currencies emerge, I think governments are going to, they like having a monopoly on currency. So their interest is going to go up the more effective or the bigger that network gets. I think they're intrigued at the moment. I think they're watching carefully. And I think that the closer you get to their monopoly, the more heartburn you're going to cause them, the more interest you're going to attract. These more tokens that are based on communities, I think that the governments generally will let them flourish with an eye towards fraud or an eye towards abuse. And if the community is well behaved, I think generally they'll probably be left alone. If they become a problem or they get a lot of complaints, then I think governments generally stick in. I don't think anybody thinks SolarCoin is going to emerge as a replacement for the US dollar anytime soon. Nick would like for that, but I don't think anybody does. So I think you really want to think about community-based tokens, these more general currencies. And it's a controversial topic. We'd have to have a separate seminar to talk about all the issues, but I think I'm going to separate them.
Yeah, we're not trying to replace any central banks. They do an okay job. So we're just a complementary piece there, a small economy.
I just want to say, if you're saying the average, time a currency lasts is 20 years, but the US dollar and the British pound has been going on for 200, I don't think it's that bad. They've done a good job, right?
Yes, yeah, there are plenty of large institutions doing a fairly good job growing economies and providing stability out there. So
for the better or for worse. Okay, yes. Christian Gertig today, he's an old friend and he's asking really good questions. So Christian, respect for you. So who is buying all the SolarCoin, thus giving it value? Just are investors buying this stuff? Are they betting on an increase? Who is giving the value? Who wants to take it?
The answer is we really don't know. It's an open system like Bitcoin, and so we don't know who is holding, what their horizons are, etc. What we're literally watching is the booting up of a microeconomy. It is a monetary experiment that's been going on for 4 years now. Started at half a cent in value and a handful of people, and now looking at thousands of people and a higher price point, a larger market cap, and we're looking to target of getting 1 million solar installations. Okay,
so just one more question, and then we'll say goodbye for today, and then tomorrow is another day, and we'll talk tomorrow more about how you get your SolarCoin, guys. So you need to come back. So when you get more SolarCoin, or when there are more SolarCoin produced, does that mean that the value falls down?
Paul, do you want to do the per node story?
I'm dying to listen to this. Go on.
Yeah, that's always the first step is people, and what Nick said is very important, is the belief system almost always fails from overissuance. But that overissuance is generally a printing press that can't stop. The nice part about the SolarCoin itself and the whole structure is that it will only be produced with well, we're producing solar energy, but the claiming of that solar energy. So the supply is going to be very much constrained by that process. And Nick doesn't have a printing press. He doesn't have access to a printing press. He can't ever overprint. It would be impossible. The other side of it is this demand. And as Nick said a moment ago, we're, I guess, running an experiment. We think of it as an experiment on top of a very important mission. So don't mistake that we're just, this is fun, we're running an experiment. No, the mission is to promote solar energy production, which we think is a very good thing. What the experiment is to see what the value of that coin is over time. We know the mission is right. We know that rewarding people for that is a very good thing. We think at the end of the day, if we just reward people and acknowledge that the planet is a better place, and we think we've done part of our mission. We just anticipate, since we're both economists, that a network will emerge, and you will have a lot of people that want to support that network. And so what they'll do is be happy to accept SolarCoin, because it will be their way of supporting that mission. And maybe they won't throw over all of their acceptance. You can only use SolarCoin to buy coffee in their shop, but they might say, "Hey, listen, we'll take fiat, or we'll take SolarCoin." And we take SolarCoin because we want to promote it. We think that that's my way of supporting the network. And the number of agents that accept SolarCoin, the bigger the network becomes, and the more fun it becomes. And if I accept SolarCoin in my coffee shop because I want to promote it, but I also know that, guess what? The guy down the block, you can buy a sandwich with SolarCoin. So I can take my SolarCoin that I earn through selling coffee, and now I go buy a sandwich, because it's the sandwiches guy's way of supporting the SolarCoin. And we think governments will have an important role in this, because they want to promote it. So they'll say, hey, guess what? You can pay part of your electric bill in SolarCoin, because that's our way of supporting solar energy. So the experiment part is to see how the network unfolds. The mission part is to increase the production, encourage the production of SolarCoin. And we think those two things will work out well together.
Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, so we run out of time. I'm going to let you go, unless, Nick, do you have any quick comments about anything? Because I know you've been answering things furious.
Yeah, so, I just want to indicate there is a metric, a monetary metric that Paul and I have researched across 100 currencies for the nodes and the number of participants in the network. So as we add more nodes and people Typically, the emergent value is anywhere between $750 and $3,000 per participant. For whatever.
Excellent. That is it. So guys, thank you very much for attending. Paul, thank you very much for your time. Nick, thank you very much for your time. I'll see you guys tomorrow for the how to get your SolarCoins. So this is the time where you actually learn what you need to do to get it. And then we'll ask you to give it away to charity to try to get things moving. But at least you get to know how to do it. So see you tomorrow, same time. And thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.